Okay, so as you can see, we have a current flow direction and we have the electron flow. We know the electrons are flowing opposite from our observation of current flow. We say that current flows from a positive to a less positive. All right, that's indicating that current flow flows to ground. We know the electrons are leaving and going back to the positive plate, right? The electrons are flowing through the circuit and they're flowing back to the positive plate. So what we see here is we place the capacitor in a closed circuit, right? Power is flowing. The source voltage forces the electrons around the circuit, right? They're trying to leave. The electrons cannot cross the dielectric. The electrons form on a plate, and that plate becomes negative. The other plate loses electrons because they all flew back to the battery, and that becomes positive. So the current flow flows until the voltage charge across both plates are matching. Right? So you can see the electrons are trying to flow back to the battery. They build up on one side, and that side becomes overwhelmingly negative. The other side, they continue to run, and they evacuate, leaving less. Right? The electrons repelled from this plate leave the positives behind and make this plate positive, and that's how a capacitor works. Now you have a charge stored in. Right? At that point, the negative plate and the negative terminal of the battery are the same negative potential. The positive plate and the positive terminal of the battery are also at equal positive potential. So we have a full battery voltage on one side and a full ground on the other side. The battery has a voltage charge across the terminals, and the capacitor has an equal voltage charge across the plates. So the battery has a charge, and now the capacitor has a charge. The circuit is now in balance, so there's no current flow. It's just sitting there, charged up. The plates of the capacitor now have an electrostatic charge because of the opposite charges. This charge now stores the energy like a battery. If the circuit is opened, the capacitor will now hold its charge until it's connected to an external circuit where it can discharge. Oops. If connected to an external circuit, the capacitor will discharge and the plates will now be neutral again because all the energy stored from that circuit is returned back into the circuit. Don't be that circuit. All right? If you become the connection between the two sides of that capacitor, that electrical charge will flow into your fingers, into your body. If it's a tiny capacitor, you go, ow. If it's a big one, it can make your heart skip a beat, burn you, right? Treat all the capacitors as if they are charged. Discharge with a test light to ground, right? If you take the two, and I'll show you on the videos that you'll see for your experiments, you can discharge one by putting the positive to the negative, and it will neutralize it. Okay, we got to get that charge out to ground. I will show you that in the videos I make for your experiments. Okay, so look at this picture and you can visualize what happens. Right, here's the positive side of the battery, here's the negative. Right, so we say the current flows from positive to ground. But the reality is the electrons are flowing the opposite direction. Right, the electrons are trying to flow to the positive plate. Right, so as the electrons are flowing, they flow out the negative, they go through the car, right, and back to the positive plate. So all of those negatives build up on the one side. All the electrons that are in the positive side here flow back to the battery. And now you have negative charge, positive charge. In between the two, in between the negative and the positive, we have an electrostatic charge field between the capacitor plates, right? These are the two, this is the dielectric in the middle, and these are your two plates that are wrapped around. Right? This means fixed capacitors, right? They have one value and that's it. Now, if you look, this is a polar capacitor, right? You have a positive and negative polarity here. This is a non-polar. You hook it up and it will put that plate on whichever side it needs to be, right? Whichever side becomes negative, whichever side becomes positive. These are variable capacitors. Certain kinds of capacitors can change their capacitance based on other inputs, more solid state kind of components. Capacitors are measured in farads, right? Michael Faraday, 1791 to 1867, is who it's named after. The symbol is a capital F. If a charge of 1 coulomb, right, that's the metric charge, if a charge of 1 coulomb is placed on the plates of a capacitor and the potential difference between them is 1 volt, the capacitance is defined as 1 farad, right? Now you have to look at this. 1 coulomb is 6.25 times 10 to the 18th electrons, right? That's what we said was amperage, right, per second. 1 coulomb equals 1 amp per second. They're one and the same. If you get zapped by a 1 amp per second load, you are now an angel. The capacitance of a capacitor is proportional to the quantity of charge that can be stored on it for each volt difference of potential, right? 12 volts, 13 volts, 14 volts, 15 volts, etc. Now, if you look over here, this is 4,700 microfarads. Okay, the mu symbol is micro, less than 1 farad, right? 4,700 micro. And we can see that its working voltage is 25 volts. And we can see that this is your negative lead, this is your positive lead. Right? This is the direction of current flow. But really, this side, well, this side becomes the positive plate because all the electrons flow back, and this side's the negative one because they all go here and they bottom out on this one. And these are the last two things I'm going to show you, and then the next video that you're going to see is on this battery. So if we wire these in parallel, we end up with more plates, right? If we can make the plates bigger, we can have more capacitance. By putting them in parallel, we do not increase voltage, we increase the storage capacity of one, right? So if we put 4 of these in a row and we put them in parallel, the value, the voltage range of one capacitor is what's in play, but our capacitance, our microfarad of capacitance becomes bigger, as opposed to wiring them in parallel, right? We put them in parallel, positive to negative, to positive to negative, to positive to negative, all the way through. We end up increasing the voltage that it can supply, but decreasing the capacitance. Okay, the area between the plates are decreased, and it holds less. But we can take a 2-volt capacitor and join it with another one and make it 4 volts, and join it with another one and make it 6 volts and 8 volts, and on and on. But the depth of its capacitance will not be increased.